Welcome to the Committee on World Food Security special session on implementing CFS guidelines for people and planet, the role of the private sector. We are excited to be sharing knowledge experiences with the wide array of speakers. But most important, we're excited that over 100 participants registered for this session. In terms of house rules, may I kindly ask that you rename your cluster on the participation list by clicking on the participants button to the top of the Zoom window. Next to your name in the participants list, can you make sure your name is correct, plus the organization that you represent? It's important for us because we would like to know the stakeholder groupings that are participating. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the CCAFS and the World Benchmarking Alliance website immediately after this event. In terms of your active participation, we encourage you to put your questions on this session for the panel discussions. Please type your questions in the Zoom chat box, and we will be shortlisting questions and asking our speakers and panelists to respond to you. So please, let's have an interactive session. This side event will demonstrate how CFS policy products are used by organizations and have therefore extended the impact on improving food security worldwide. The World Benchmarking Alliance, WBA, will present how they have integrated CFS guidelines, including CFS principles for responsible investment in agriculture and food systems, and the CFS voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests in the context of national food security, amongst others, in the methodology of their food and agriculture benchmarking. This will be followed by a panel discussion, which will broaden the conversation out and explore why there is need for business alignment of monitoring frameworks, and they can help us to realize positive impact for both us, the people, and the planet. Our objectives are threefold. One, we would like to showcase how initiatives have integrated CFS products into their work. Second, we want to hear from stakeholders as to why business alignment of monitoring frameworks such as CFS products are crucial to realizing more impact for farming communities and for the planet. And third, we'd like to discuss the challenges regarding alignment or implementation and how these can be remedied. Clearly, as you can see, at the center of implementing these CFS guidelines for people and planet, we want to hear from the private sector. How do CFS guidelines get used? How are they monitored? And how are they translated into action? What I know for sure is that whatever we don't measure, we cannot be accountable for the impact. So benchmarking is important, reporting on measurements is important, but most important, policing those implementations is critical. So we are in it together and no one is to be left behind. There are so many acronyms in this world of sustainable food systems. I did a quick survey. CFS VGGT, you better note this down. CFS Voluntary Guidelines on the Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land, Fisheries, and Forests in the context of National Food System. 1. 2, CFS RAI, Principles for Responsible Investment in Agriculture and Food Systems. CFS, United Nations Committee on World Food Security, our conveners. CCAFS, the Program on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security. CIAT, the CGIAR Institution Alliance of Biodiversity International and International Center for Tropical Agriculture. UNFSS, that's the big one that we are aiming for September, the United Nations Food Systems Summit. WBA, World Benchmarking Alliance. WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And finally, WFO, World Farmers Organization. It's a mouthful. Don't say I did not warn you, because our eminent speakers will fall back and use these acronyms. So keep your notepad as we begin the event and hear from our ambassador, Ambassador Hans Hoogeveen, who's going to deliver the opening remarks. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you very much, Lindiwe. Great to see you, and great to see you all, ladies and gentlemen. I would say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I think with the virtual setting, we have a broad audience worldwide. And it's really an honor to be with you speaking about this important issue, and speaking about the work being done by the Committee on Food Security. And of course, we all know that COVID-19 has plunged the world in the biggest crisis since several decades. And this crisis is coming above other crises, like the crisis of 700 million people and increasing living in hunger. The 1.2 billion people who don't have access to affordable food, accessible food, and 1.6 billion people with obesity. And at the same time, we are losing biodiversity. We are cutting our forest, which will be a disaster for the world and for the generations, future generations. And let's not forget that we lose 1/3 our food production every year. That's the size of the land of China. So we know what our challenges are. And I think with these crises, the vulnerabilities of our food systems have laid bare. And at the same time, we have the roadmap of Agenda 2030 with its Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, we are looking forward to the UN Food Systems Summit, giving us hopefully actions to be done in the near future. But sometimes I think when we are discussing now, at least some of us are discussing the outcomes of the World Food Systems Summit, we forget already work being done by the Committee on Food Security. We have spent almost 3 years in trying to achieve guidelines for sustainable food systems and nutrition. And I had the honor for the last phase to chair these negotiations. And we put everybody, member states, private sector, civil society, put more than 350 hours in tough negotiations. But we achieved the voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition. And they are not mentioned enough when we are preparing ourselves for the Food Systems Summit. Because when you read these guidelines, they are very practical. They are implementable. They make sure that we can improve our food systems. We can make sure that we get more food accessible for everybody. But of course, we have only set the first step with agreeing to those guidelines. And we know it's not one size fits all, because we know that the different regions and the different countries have different priorities, different concerns, and different challenges. So it's up to us now to translate those guidelines into action on the ground. And of course, it has to be done in the circumstances of each country, with the priorities of each country, but also with the support of all. And we have now the national dialogues for the preparation of the Food Systems Summit. And I think those national dialogues, that grouping, gives us an excellent basis for the implementation of the voluntary guidelines. That are voluntary guidelines, but they are directed not only to governments, they're also directed to the private sector, to companies, they're also directed to civil society, they're also directed to other NGOs. Because it's clear that only if we do it together at the national level, with a strong involvement of the private sector, but also strong involvement of civil society, we can make sure that things are going to change and that we will go in the direction of sustainable food systems and nutrition for all. But for that, of course, we have to also look to the private sector. The private sector is crucial. The private sector is crucial not only for their investments. The private sector is also crucial for their technologies, for their capacity. And we have to make sure that the implementation is country-owned, country-driven and country-owned by the governments, but also private sector-driven. But what I mean with private sector-driven, private sector of the countries driven where we want to invest, so that we don't invite multinationals to come in and take over, etc. We have to do it together. But doing it together, it also means that we need civil society to support us with their networks, to support us, to keep us sharp, that we focus on all the elements. It's not only about improving production, it's also about sustainability. It's also about nutrition, because we need more healthy diets. And luckily we can work together with international alliances. We have the support of the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture to see how we can improve agriculture production in a climate smart way in the different countries with smallholders. But we have also the Champions 12.3, which is an international network for fighting food losses. And as chair, I'm now working together with the World Bank and FAO to set up a global investment facility for fighting food losses at country level. And the principles are country-owned, private sector-owned. And we will ask the question, what can we do for the private sector to invest in fighting food losses? Would it be in storage? Would it be in better harvesting techniques? But it has to be done with the governments and also with civil society. These are examples how we can and should do our work. And of course, it's important that we monitor our work. And for that, I think it's important that we have the worldwide benchmarking alliance, helping us to monitor how companies are stepping up for the task in close cooperation with others, and that we can give them a plus if they're doing really well, and sometimes a push if they should do better. I think that's the only way forward, because we can speak with so many words at the global level. We can have many guidelines in a written form, but only when they are translated in action, only when we roll up our sleeves, only that we understand and see that we cannot do it by ourselves, neither by government only, neither by the private sector only, neither by the civil society. We have to work shoulder to shoulder to change our food systems in a better way, to make sure that we can get near to our goal of food security, leaving nobody behind. That's our task, and we cannot afford to lose that task or to miss that task. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Hans Hoogeveen, for unpacking for us the journey towards the development of the voluntary guidelines, the 350 long hours you spent with your colleagues to make sure you deliver these guidelines, and they're now sitting on the table. Thank you as well for sharing with us your other responsibilities as part of the Champions 12.3, which you co-chair, on the work you are doing to further ensure that there's no food loss and waste, all of which is helping in the food systems agenda. You've highlighted the need to measure what we do. It's important to find out from our very own WBA, World Benchmarking Alliance, how are we monitoring, how are we making sure that the tools that have been developed can be deployed, monitored, measured, and we are held to account. I would like to invite our keynote speaker now, Luiza Margulis, who is the research analyst at the World Benchmarking Alliance, who is going to unpack to us the implementation and experiences and the watch outs in this journey of measuring and benchmarking our voluntary guidelines. Over to you, Luiza.
Thank you very much, Lindiwe. I will try and sound as eloquent as you and Hans have. I do have a presentation to share with you all, so bear with me as I share my screen. Okay, hopefully you are all seeing my presentation and not my cheat sheet notes. Great. So as Lindiwe said, my name is Luiza Margulis. I'm a research analyst at the World Benchmarking Alliance working at the Food and Agriculture team. So we hear all the time that the private sector is critical to achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. But how critical is it? Let's put this in perspective. In 2020, the total global GDP was roughly $87 trillion. But what's even more shocking is that in the same year, a group of just 2,000 companies made more than half of that amount in revenue. Together, they employ over 100 million people and operate in 80 different countries. This group of 2,000 companies is what we at WBA refer to as the SDG 2000. These are the companies that we've identified as influential and that will help shape our future. Right now, not a single country is on track to achieving the SDGs by 2030. If that is to happen, then we require transformational change in every sector by every stakeholder. But the private sector specifically can play a leading role in these transformations by creating sustainable, inclusive, and innovative solutions. But these businesses need support. They need a roadmap and guidance on how to translate the SDGs into action on their part. And this is exactly what we've done at WBA. Our benchmarks translate societal expectations into metrics and providing companies with a clear path forward. The benchmarks and the rankings we create in turn show where industries and individual companies stand in their journey to a more sustainable future. So you can see here that we've identified 7 different systems critical to achieving the SDGs. But today we're going to be zooming in on the food and agriculture system. So the food and agriculture benchmark is assessing 350 companies along the entire food system value chain, from farm to fork. The goal really is to measure progress across the entire system. So from inputs and commodities, all the way to food retailers and restaurants. The companies were chosen because of their size in terms of revenue and employee numbers, but also their reach. So how far across the globe they're spread or how many subsidiaries they have. These companies cannot opt in or out, so no one has paid to join or to be excluded. And they were chosen as part of conversations we've had with expert members who support us throughout our research process. And in fact, 100 of these companies have never before been benchmarked by anyone else. Our methodology brings together the key topics and issues on which society expects companies to take action. So you can see we've identified 4 main measurement areas, and these are governance and strategy, environment, nutrition, and social inclusion. Our methodology is the result of extensive expert and stakeholder consultations. These are the 4 areas that the 350 companies in our scope are going to be assessed against. So there's an impossible to count number of companies in the world, and they have access to probably an also impossible to count number of agendas, frameworks, and initiatives to help guide them depending on the topic. But because of this, there can be a bit of information overload for companies when they're trying to keep up with all of these initiatives. This is why alignment is so important. Aside from the amount and variety of initiatives, it just makes life easier. Aligned expectations means that we're speaking a common language that is easier for all stakeholders, principally companies, to understand. It also means that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. No one organization can be a specialist in every field. So leveraging and reusing data and collaborating with existing initiatives saves time. But now let's speak a little bit more concretely about how our food and agriculture team has actually aligned with and integrated the relevant frameworks and principles into our own methodology. So each of these initiatives on the left has a specific objective. For example, those that focus on global nutrition or those that focus on ending deforestation. Each of these contain extremely valuable and detailed guidelines for either governments, the public, or the private sector to play its role and act. But as I said, there are indeed numerous agendas and initiatives to consider. Our food and agriculture team has, over the last 2 years, through extensive collaboration, identified and integrated as much as we could into a methodology that will assess every type of company on the food value chain. The two key documents that really inform our indicators are the CFS, here are the acronyms, Voluntary Guidelines on Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land, or the VGGT, and the CFS Principles for Responsible Investment in Agriculture, or the RIE Principles. These have played a key role mainly in our social inclusion and nutrition measurement areas. So here's where we get a little bit more technical. Land rights is a critical issue in the food and agriculture value chain because a growing population means that there's more pressure on the land available for food production. A significant violation of human rights occurs when companies, knowingly or not, fail to obtain consent from legitimate landholders. Also, there's actually no international human right to land, and depriving a household or a community of their right to access land can deprive them of their livelihoods. The VGGT provides companies with principles and standards for them to improve their land and forest tenure governance. How do we apply it in our methodology? Well, the VGGT are most relevant within the social inclusion measurement area. This is where we have the indicators on farmer and fisher livelihoods and land rights. You can see here that we explicitly ask companies to commit to the principles outlined in the VGGT. We also require companies to have a grievance mechanism and a remediation process, for example. You can see that we've extracted, in a way, the guidelines that are most relevant to the private sector and required companies to abide by them. The objective of the CFS RIE principles is to promote responsible investment in systems that contribute to food security and nutrition. You can see the 10 principles here. And although our methodology references pretty much all of them throughout, it's really in these 3 principles that you can find the most parallels. So again, in our methodology, the RIE principles are most relevant within social inclusion and nutrition. The goal of the nutrition indicators really is to improve food security. And you can see here some of the ways that we expect the companies to be acting. The same goes for social inclusion, specifically where we reference the importance of identifying and addressing the risks to vulnerable populations throughout the supply chain. One last thing to note, another acronym, is that of course we've not forgotten the CFS Voluntary Guidelines on Food Systems and Nutrition. However, our methodology was published before this document was made public, but nonetheless, we absolutely align on the general principles, the basic definitions, and the core topics within the document. Finally, just in case you missed it, here's a quick summary. Companies and key actors are key actors in our path to achieving the SDGs by 2030, but they receive a lot of information. So we must align initiatives wherever possible. Our food and agriculture methodology has aligned to these key agendas, such as the VGGT and the RIE principles. You can find the results of our first benchmark, which will be published in September of this year. Thank you very much for putting up with all my slide animations, and please don't hesitate to contact me. It was great speaking to you all.
Thank you very much, Luiza, for unpacking the benchmarks and sharing with us some concrete examples of how the WBA has integrated the principles for responsible investment in agriculture and food systems, and I want to use your acronym VGGT. Thank you very much. Now, let's go to our panel. It's a gender correct panel that's going to go into discussion. They were introduced at the beginning, but let me just give you a snapshot of who is here and what we are going to be discussing. We have Victoria Crawford, Investment Partnership Network Manager, the Just Rural Transition at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have Tiffany Talsma, Climate Strategy Specialist at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. We have Victoria de Bourbon de Palm, Lead at Food and Agriculture Transformation World Benchmarking Alliance, and a farmer, a commercial farmer, Nono Sekoto. As I said, it's a gender correct panel, and we are going to have fun. Ladies, welcome. Great to be engaging with you. Let me start off with Tiffany. Tiffany, how do you see science-based targets emerging in the space of agroecology, and how will the CFS policy recommendations on agroecology influence the work that you do?
Thank you, Lindiwe. It's a great question. And just to say a bit about what I do, I work with the CGIAR to bring our research to inform agribusiness sustainability strategy. Most of our projects are really focused on application. And what we see is that for most companies, the reason that they're not following agroecological practices is not for a want of guidelines about how to target their investments, but rather there's a pretty big lack of evidence in the links to the types of metrics that they are interested in tracking, including yield impacts, risk reduction, opportunity to reduce cost. We recently did with the CCAFS team a review on the evidence of the links between climate benefits and agroecology, and it was really hard to find concrete, quantitative, robust evidence that could be used to back up those kinds of strategies. So when we're asking companies to make multi-million-dollar, multi-year investments into changing practice, that's a big risk, and we need stronger evidence to make that case in a convincing way. This is also exacerbated by the fact that we're usually working with hard-nosed procurement teams. And there's a big disconnect between the timelines that are required for sustainable investments and the way that a private sector supply chain operates. Procurement teams are rewarded for meeting volume and quality targets at least the same cost as last year, if not lower. They're not looking at 5 to 10 year payment or benefits from their investments. So if this has to change, I would say the role for CFS guidelines and indeed the member states would be the need to change the rules of the game through better informed policy and regulation. That would make my job a lot easier.
Yep, hard-nosed, as you say. Thank you, Tiffany. I'll come back to you later, but let me go to business. The hard-nosed people. Victoria, how do you use frameworks such as the ones produced by CFS and WBA when engaging with business? What has been your experience and what can you share with us?
Yeah, sure. So WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, is a membership organization. We work with over 200 business members to support them in addressing some of the world's most challenging sustainability issues, specifically climate, biodiversity, and inequality. And so what we do is support our members to adopt and use these type of frameworks. And we've been working on metrics since in the climate smart agriculture space since 2015. I think the thing to emphasize is that we've picked this up as an issue because our members have asked us to focus on it. They really recognize that benchmarking and working towards these frameworks is an important way for them to increase and improve their own sustainability approaches. So we've responded to that request. An example is through our smarter metrics work as part of our what was our climate smart agriculture work over the past few years. We've supported 30 plus companies in adopting corporate targets on sustainability issues. Perhaps a more recent example of how we've helped our member companies to adopt these frameworks is during a call with our members just last week. We invited the World Benchmarking Alliance to present their work as a way of giving visibility to it amongst that community. But as well as supporting our members to adopt these frameworks and targets, they also sit at the core of WBCSD's own strategy. And that's in two ways. One is in terms of our membership policy. So this year, we announced a set of membership requirements, which are asking companies that are members of WBSSD to make commitments such as committing to the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights, making a net zero commitment, but also there's one explicitly on metrics and disclosure. So that's very much, sits at the core of the companies that we work with. And secondly is how we integrate these types of frameworks into our own work plan. Within the Food and Agriculture programme, we are developing a food and agriculture roadmap, which looks at what companies need to do in order to meet sustainability challenges. And that very much draws on existing targets and indicators, such as those that we've been speaking about today, pulling it together into a roadmap of priorities for both individual businesses, but also for industries as a whole. And that's the work that shapes WBCSD's own work plan. So which initiatives and projects we focus on, which topics we really pick up. Frameworks such as these really sit at the core of what we do.
Thank you, Victoria, for sharing. We've heard about big business. We've heard about the benchmarking of over 350 companies. We have a farmer in the room, in the panel. No, you are private sector as well, but I don't see your name and name of your farm in that list of 350. Do you interact with these big boys in the game of this whole benchmarking frameworks we are hearing about? What is your experience in interacting with big business?
So thank you very much, Lindiwe, for this opportunity. And it's always interesting to obviously bring, the farmer's voice along such conversations. What's interesting for me is, you're right, partnerships are very important. So it's not only the responsibility of private sector on their own, public sector also has a responsibility to be able to provide meaningful support, as well as obviously guidelines as how to get those, to achieve those points that we're trying to set forward. However, as somebody who, I'm going to give you something of a personal note. Being a farmer has allowed me to interact in a way that I wouldn't have thought was so important. Especially
what are you farming? No. What are you farming?
Currently, I'm mainly farming with cattle. So that's my main enterprise. But over the years, I've experienced with apple orchards. We've also planted sunflower and maize, as well as dairy. So I kind of have been able to understand the variety of commodities. But I think participating with the sector itself is very important for someone like myself to be able to get support and understand how to participate in the sector. So when it comes to interacting with big business, there's a huge responsibility that they have to get, to kind of support the government as well, to get our businesses also up to speed with what is required. And just to give you a short introduction around, I'm from South Africa. And in South Africa, our big business is actually, there's a policy that informs our businesses that they have to actually support SMMEs in a variety of ways. So because it's a must in our sector, finding ways to support small businesses and agribusinesses and farmers is also very critical. But what we find is that it's really around, one, providing them awareness as to how to support, because a lot of times big business will focus on what they need, right? So a lot of times is that they need tick exercises. So if the government says you have to do X, Y, Z, then that's all they do. But that may not be impactful on the right ways for the smallholder farmers or whoever farmers people operating in the sector. So for me, it's around building partnership with organizations such as AFASA and those that are actually supporting farmers on the ground. It's really important for stakeholders to have those relationships, to understand the points of where they can actually make that impact. I think Tiffany also mentioned this earlier, is that not one company can do everything, right? And because of that, you've got to be able to find multiple stakeholders who are providing various support to organizations such as AFASA, who are helping farmers at the lower levels, because they would be the ones that know where maybe the money needs to be channeled, or where a different type of support is required. So for me, those are the discussions that we have when we sit in front of big business. And just to close off, the idea of big business also contributing to points such as SDGs, that's another one that's coming into play quite a lot. A lot of times the business don't know how to do that because they're really focused around the work they're doing, and it may not directly impact into those sustainable goals. But if you support businesses that do, that enables them to actually find a way to participate and find ways to actually support those SDGs. And that's a lot of conversations we're giving them to say, even if you're not doing it directly, support those that are actually targeting those. And in our sector, we touch on a lot of those SDGs.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nono. I really like that example out of South Africa, where as government, there is a standing policy for creating win-win partnerships between business and small business, but also making sure that you create partnerships that create the friendship, so that it's not a policed arrangement, but you also teach big business what it is to have equitable partnerships, not just extractive partnerships for compliance with what government wants, but really long-term life-enhancing partnerships that are equitable. Thank you so much, Nono. It's good to know, and it will be good to share with other countries. Let me go back to WBA. Victoria de Bourbon de Palm, you are in the business of benchmarking, you are in the business of aligning. That must be a tough job you've got. You are building on existing frameworks and making sure there's alignment. Can you share with us your experiences, the challenges you face, and possible remedies for some of the hands-on challenges you've come across in the business of alignment?
Thank you very much, Lindiwe. And it's funny that you mentioned that alignment should be a challenge, because actually I do see it as a great opportunity, and because we don't have to do all the work. So we actually can learn and foster and bring everything in that's already been done. So the benchmark that you've seen Luiza explain more in detail in the beginning of this presentation, it's been 3 years in the making. And it has taken so long because of that alignment, and not because it's so difficult, but because it's such a broad stakeholder group. As you've seen, there's so many initiatives that we needed to embrace and embed into that methodology, but also stakeholder groups to speak about. You referenced Nono and how farmers have been part of this process. Well, actually, farmer cooperatives and farmer voices have been one of the stakeholders that we've consulted as well, because even if our theory of change is built on that these big businesses, these 350, which represent over half of global food and agriculture revenue, if they change, we hope that there's a trickle effect all the way into their subsidiaries. But of course, the pledges and commitments they are making usually have to happen on farm level. So it's crucial to really bring those in, as Nono also said, to really see whether it's not just a tick the box exercise, but whether we're actually helping every entity along the value chain. So alignment with initiatives, but also with other index initiatives. I mean, we're just one of many that is measuring these important goals and commitments, because there's just a vast amount out there. And we've got very close collaborations with many of them that are relevant. So Forest 500, the Access to Nutrition Initiative. With the latter, for example, they'll be publishing their global index in about a month, I think, the Global Nutrition Index. And with them, we even went a step further. We are data sharing, actually. So the data that they've gathered, which is not confidential, they are sharing with us so that we are deriving our research on the right metrics. And because one of the main things we hear from companies is reporting burden. It's great that these initiatives are out there really measuring what companies are doing, but we don't want to overburden them, obviously. So these data sharing is important, but I think so a challenge is to really to not stay in your silo, to really open it up, also to put your ego a bit behind, because others might have a far greater solution than to what you in your own group are thinking of. So I love these multi-stakeholder initiatives that come together and really bring those different voices, like the CFS is doing, but also the one of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD. Really important to have globally agreed upon metrics. I just yesterday was part of a task force that is starting to define more scientific principles and metrics on sustainable agriculture practices. It's led by the FAO to really put into metrics what is regenerative, what is circular, what is agroecology, and the policy that's coming out today by CFS really helps in that. Just to really bring that together, we can draw upon that knowledge, and the main thing is really just to join up, because those joint efforts, then we can realize these joint goals that we have.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And I think what's clear is that we are all in it together. And as you're saying, it's great fun. It's not a challenge. You found it rewarding to include everybody in the process. It's all exciting to learn from all of you. I would love to bring the audience, but please allow me just one more round of questions with you. And these will need just snappy answers. I want to go back to you, Tiffany, I promised. What is the biggest challenge that you're facing? Give me a snapshot. It must be at the face of your operations, unlike Victoria, who sees every challenge as an opportunity. What's your greatest challenge?
That's a great question, Lindiwe. I think the one that is really a day-to-day challenge working where I work in a global research organization with a bunch of postdocs and scientists is really making that bridge between research and practice happen and stick. And so we're often a little bit preaching to the choir when we talk to the sustainability teams in the big businesses. And where they need our help is to create that burning platform with their procurement colleagues. That requires a total change of mindset in the way that our research teams normally work. We have to be focused much more on applied research, much more specific on the supply chain specific impacts, and also translating our results into layman business language. It requires getting researchers to accept good enough is actually better than great. Lean approaches that leverage existing data and focus on replicability and cost effectiveness of our methods is actually better than a novel project that brings in a lot of new data sources. That's just not going to be replicable, and the impact will suffer as a result. So we're learning to think about doing research in just enough pieces of information to target sustainability investments better, and moving our mindset from an obsession with accuracy to an obsession of being really tailored and specific to specific needs so that it can form investment better.
Being practical. Thank you very much, Tiffany. Let me go over to Victoria Crawford. You are with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So how do these standards and frameworks contribute to increased involvement by investors so that they realize impact for people and the planet? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, standards and frameworks are really important for helping investors to engage on sustainability issues. At one level, it allows them to understand what they're investing in and how that contributes to their own sustainability goals. And it's about kind of giving a confidence that these priorities are actually going to lead to impact. I'll give one example from some of our work in supporting investment in sustainable rice. So sustainable rice is a potentially really important way to drive both environmental and social impact. It's the crop that feeds more than half of the world's population every day, but at the same time has the same carbon footprint as the aviation industry as a whole. So there's a really big opportunity to move to more sustainable forms of rice production to address some of these both social and environmental goals. The conversations that we've been having about how to increase finance and investment to sustainable rice, we've heard from investors that the fact that there's a really clear standard for what sustainable rice looks like, which has been developed by the Sustainable Rice Platform, makes it a much more attractive area for them to focus on because they have a clear idea of what it means. The second point about engaging about investors' interest in standards and frameworks is it allows them to communicate with businesses about the progress that's being made. So again, it's over time, what are the differences that are being made? And then thirdly, perhaps just to point to the wider environment at the moment, which is there are a lot of concerns about greenwashing. And for investors to deal with that, they need to be confident and certain that their investments really are meeting sustainability objectives and that they can show that. So having clear standards and frameworks allows them to address some of those concerns.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Victoria. What does it all mean for farmers? No, we have all these frameworks, but you farm for business and you want to see impact. So we have these frameworks. How do you see them translating into impact for the farming community?
So I think, Linda, the most important thing is around educating the farmers, right? As you said, we're all, all stakeholders have their own reason for existing, and we all know what our goals are. But for us to be able to, be part of the community.
What are your goals?
Well,
what are your goals as a farmer?
My goals are to obviously, increase production, make more money, employ more young people. That's kind of what I'm focused on. But for me to be able to do that, I need support, right, into my business. And for me to support, to access that support, let's say, for instance, through big business or the association that we work with, I then need to know how it is that I need to participate, because it's those frameworks that then need to be kind of translated in what do I do then on a daily basis to make sure that I'm actually participating and are actually part of the community, contributing where I need to, and also benefiting in the way that I expect to. And I think, even talking to a big business, I think that's probably the thing that's kind of lacking. It's about them being able to see, the way Victoria highlights it is that it's so important for big business to see that if I put this much money, this is the benefits that I get. So incentives are also very important, and that's just facts of life. But it's also important for them to see how they're contributing to the bigger framework. And with the farmers, it's exactly the same. Education around what we need to do on a daily basis is very critical, because you can get lost in what is important to you. And so being able, and I think Tiffany also mentioned the whole, how do you then translate, scientific big words, big things to the small business or to your direct day-to-day working. And I think, to me, that's really the most important part of making sure that we're translating the right information for the right stakeholders to be able to participate at the right level.
Excellent. So education and incentives are key in making sure that we stay within and are not left behind. Excellent. Victoria, my audience, I'm coming to you shortly. Keep those questions coming up. We will be engaging with you shortly. I promise this is my last question to the panel. Victoria de Bourbon de Palm, how do you see the development of review mechanisms in this special current year where we are raising expectations because of the UNFCCC, the UN Food Systems Summit, and all the other UN engagements that are happening? What is your sense of what is happening?
Well, again, I'm a positive person, so again, I'm very excited, but I'm especially excited not just because of being an optimist, but because it really has shifted also the attention to monitoring and review. Because over the past few years, many pledges have been done, commitments have been done, some fatigue around that, and then it takes so much effort to really set those goals that there's a deflated attention to really keeping them up and to really reviewing that on an annual basis and to really perfecting that and following that progress. And what I'm very clearly seeing, I mean, let's be honest, in the past half year, we've had more dialogues around food systems than in the past 5 years. So there's really so much momentum on this summit, where the summit has, of course, also set out as a very clear goal and outcome that monitoring and review needs to be one of the outcomes. Now, Philippe Allo talked about that in more detail in the closing remarks, but that has really given a push. Of course, CFS is also putting extra attention on this monitoring, not just to have the guidelines, but really how it's been followed up, how impact is being measured. I see it in the work with the European Commission, where the Code of Conduct on Responsible Business and Marketing will be published soon. It's a voluntary guideline, just like the CFS guidelines, but also their monitoring and review will play a part. So we are seeing that is a crucial necessity for impact. And I want to make clear, Ambassador Hans at the beginning said that benchmarks are really putting a plus and applauding on what is going well, and also giving a push on where companies maybe are lagging. But I personally very much see it as these rankings and indexes are not meant to finger point at any party which is lagging, but to really point out how we can do better, because we know the goals, we know what we need to do, but to really establish together a dialogue on why isn't it happening yet, where are the bottlenecks, and how can we make sure that, especially through multi-stakeholder collaborations, through setting your commitments, also to sharing best practices amongst each other, how it can be done. And hopefully monitoring and review plays a very crucial role in that, I think. So to realize those goals by really measuring what is being done and learning from others how we can step up the game.
I like your emphasis on we measure so that we learn from each other and achieve our impact so that we can improve our game. If we don't measure it, we will not make impact. Thank you very much, Victoria. Let me now turn to our audience. I've got Victor Comerel, I've got Charles Mwajeka, who have fielded questions. Please, could you put the spotlight on them so that we can allow them to ask their questions live? They've posted them on the chat, but it would be good to see other faces. Over to you, Victor Comerel.
How are you?
Put your camera on. I hope you can. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much, Victor. Over to you.
It's been a while, huh? That you've been at Summit.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's really, when I think of the realities that our scientists deal with when they do field research and they interact with seed companies, with processors, you know, it's orange flesh stuff, Harvest Plus. I just don't see the connection between the benchmarking you're talking about and how this hits the ground. That's really, so do you have evidence? And you say that, yes, we must spend more effort on monitoring and evaluation. Okay, fine. Well, what's been the evidence so far of benchmarking and that trickling down to where the problems really are? Thanks.
Thank you, Victor. I think I will take that question. Yes, it's really good question, actually. So we've indeed we have this focus on the big companies, and we're asking them to make transparent what they're doing for their own operations and as well as their supply chain. So we're asking obviously about processes in place, etc. We're also trying to get more data. There's obviously a huge data gap in what happens in the value chain. And I'm really glad we've been able to secure funding for a 3-year project to zoom into this, because indeed how this follows down all the way to farm level, but also SMEs in the middle, is something that we will be researching specifically for India and Eastern Africa. So we will pick out a few of the bigger companies, and along the next year and a half, we will interview their supply chain partners to see whether, if you have so the first benchmark is just coming out in September, so we don't know who stands where, but we want to see after September that if you have a sort of higher ranking on the benchmark, does that mean that it really has an impact and effect on your supply chain partners and on others in the value chain? Because it might be that the processes and codes of conduct are perfectly in place, but that it actually has little effect. And that is what we want to find out. But we'll get into a bit of a hurdles we're trying to work around, obviously, with trying to get people to freely speak. So we're going to have that anonymized, those interviews, and really to see how and in which regions we can get the best data. Again, that data gap on that level is a bit tricky, but we were working hard on that, because it will redefine how we can best measure this impact, this interaction, because indeed it's still a bit of a question mark, which we haven't figured out completely.
Thank you very much. Thank you for responding to that. Before I go to Charles Mwajeka, there is another question which is not attributed. What is the evidence to date on the likelihood of benchmarks changing corporate behavior, especially that they are voluntary rather than framed by regulation?
It's sort of, that came from me. It's sort of
again,
similar question. But.
All right. Okay. Anyone wants to add to that? Is voluntary good enough?
Well, maybe shall I jump in just quickly? I think voluntary is the first step up, but it shouldn't stall there. So as I said, in the European Commission, we see that.
You're muted, Victoria.
Sorry, there I am.
Thank you.
So I think voluntary is definitely a first necessary step, but we shouldn't stop there. So as I referred to the European Commission that has brought out this very ambitious farm to fork strategy, which will be translated into legislation. That will take a couple of years. But in the meantime, we need voluntary guidelines. We need to bring companies along to really have a roadmap ahead and not just bluntly put the target incredibly high. So really to gain that trust and to work together and have it voluntary, but it shouldn't stop there. It needs to step up.
Can I perhaps jump in as well on that one? Which is, I very, very much agree with all of that. Like, it's the voluntary piece is only part of the picture here. And there's a need for all sorts of accountability mechanisms. Another thing which I find quite interesting was how the cases with Exxon and Chevron a few days ago, where the shareholders had really managed to push decisions where they didn't feel that the companies were making the right sustainability choices. And I think what this highlights is like another way that is another thing where we need the data for that type of change in pressure and accountability mechanism to happen. So it sits in this kind of wider piece.
Thank you for bringing those live examples of recent happenings in big business where shareholder voice translates into big changes. Can we move to Charles Mwajeka? Are you online, Charles? And can you put your camera on and ask your question live? Thank you, Charles. Please unmute. Thank you. You're muted. Thank you. Over to you, Charles.
Yes, thank you for giving us an opportunity just to have a question. I asked one that, how do we know that we are sure about these findings which we have in these organs that really have an impact to the small farmers? I'm talking about the most areas, especially in East Africa and other part of the world, that most small farmers help us in reducing the effects of these we call food safety. So how we are sure that we have CITs, those CIGR who help us in findings which help us to translate them and help these small farmers. Before, Nono said that most of the big enterprises and big farmers actually are benefiting from these findings, but I don't know how we are sure that we're going to find that those small farmers are
Thank you, Charles.
benefiting from these findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So Charles is crying out, the small farmer is left behind. How do we make sure that they participate, engage, and benefit? Who wants to tackle that one?
May I start, maybe, if it's okay?
Yes, go
Charles,
ahead.
I love the question, and I think it is a very important one, and I don't think that they are benefiting yet, as a rule. One of the big gaps that we see, and this is a bit what I was referring to at the end, when talking about my biggest challenge is getting specific enough. And specific enough means to take into account that smallholder experience within the specific power structure of the supply chain, dependent on the input suppliers and the advisory and the prices that they are getting in their context. So one way that we're tackling that is we've done a lot of climate suitability and climate risk assessments at CIAT over the years. And these usually are national level maps with green zones where climate will actually be more favorable to a certain crop, yellow zones where it's very uncertain, orange zones and red zones where farmers are losing out, but it's not specific. And so what we're doing now with agribusinesses is actually taking their grower data from their supply chain for specific farms, including smallholders, and using statistical downscaling methods, looking at what's the risk to individual communities and individual farmers within their supply chain, and tailoring adaptation advisory to those specific communities based on the adaptive capacity of those specific producers in their supply chain. It's a lot more work, but it is possible with the type of data that a lot of companies are collecting these days through their traceability systems. We're still a long way off, though. It's a great question.
Thank you, Tiffany. There was someone else in the panel wanted to come in there and respond to Charles.
Yes,
please go ahead, Nono.
That was myself. I think Charles is right, because if the smallholder farmers are benefiting, how will they know as well, right? And in all honesty, for that to be kind of felt, it also needs to be amplified. So it's around organizations and maybe in their communities or in their cooperatives, where you can actually see that there's multiple ways of benefiting, right? So if you are benefiting on your own, then it almost seems insignificant. But to be part of a community so that you can also hear other stories and how other people are benefiting, no matter how small it is, allows you as the farmer to realize, oh, actually, that's something I can also aspire to and something that I can actually get to. So I think you're right. The impact hasn't been felt yet by smallholder farmers, but they definitely are pockets where it is happening. And the best way to do that is finding ways to scale that. And it really it means that smallholder farmers shouldn't be on their own. You really need to find a community to be part of so that you can also learn how to benefit.
So it's all about being organized as small farmers, partnership with big farmers, and making sure that in the policy cycles and discourse, they are visible and they participate. Thank you very much, Nono, for clarifying on that. I wish we had more time and we don't. So as the questions are coming up in the chat, I would like to come to you, panel, and remind you, June 5 is World Environment Day. What does it mean to each one of you? I'm going to give you a quick round, but I also want to give the same opportunity to our audience. Please, can you type in the chat? What exactly are you doing? What are your personal actions in support of World Environment Day? If you haven't thought about it today on the 3rd of June, you're behind. We are leaving you behind. So share with us so that we learn from each other and we can partner to make it better. So let me come to my panel for that quick round, and then I'll go back to the audience before we get our speaker, Philip Elul, to come in. So panel, in the order of the presentations, bottom up, I'm going to start with Victoria de Bourbon de Palm. What does World Environment Day mean to you, and how are you positioning?
Thank you, Lindiwe. Thank you. Well, to me, the most important thing about World Environment Day is about environment, not to see it as something that is external to us, that is something different to us. We are a part of the environment, right? With the air we breathe, the food we eat, the ground we walk on. So to really be present about the fact that it's us, it's a collective sort of energy, and so on the day on 5th of June, like, so hopefully sort of every day, I really want to make sure to get out. We're all in our home offices, but to get some fresh air, get out, preferably by foot, to really see flower buds opening up, seeing insects crawling on the grass, and also just being conscious about where our food comes from, what is on our table. I know we're all working in the food system, so probably we're all a bit more aware of that, but really realizing how long certain products have taken to get to our plate, and what changes we can still make, because I'm sure every one of us can still make a change to improve the system, as we're all part of that system and we're all part of that intricate web of the environment.
Thank you for sharing. So get close to nature and be real. Over to you, Tiffany.
Well, I don't have a lot of choice on how I celebrate World Environment Day because we're in lockdown in Vietnam and I have my daughter homeschooling. But we've been celebrating by ordering in groceries delivery. She gets to pick out the vegetables that we cook, and she's part of the cooking process. So in the end, it is a bit of a blessing in disguise to bring some of the food system to her in a way that we wouldn't have done in more normal years.
Excellent, thank you. That homeschooling is keeping a lot of mothers down. Thank you for sharing that. Luiza, or Victoria first. Victoria Crawford.
Yeah, so I guess World Environment Day, so to me, it's kind of an opportunity to reflect back on my own personal lifestyle and personal choices. I think, like, all of us kind of working in this space think about these issues day to day in our jobs, but we're really looking at kind of the big scale system transformation issues. So it's a good moment to kind of turn the mirror back on how my personal lifestyle kind of impacts the environment, and that could be like have a big focus on what I eat and making sure that I make sustainable choices in that space, but also, my broader consumption patterns, how many clothes I buy, when I reuse them, when I go on holiday, how much I travel, and how to make sure that my personal environmental footprint is as positive as it can be.
Thank you. Thank God we don't have to worry about that travel environmental footprint now that we are all constrained. I specifically wanted to end up with you, Nono, on this one, because you live the soil, you breathe the soil, you are Miss Environment. Can you share with us how you are going to make this day even more special and what your reflections and lessons for all of us are?
Sure. So I feel a little bit pressured, especially because I hadn't really had any plans. But funny enough, I had a thought about something a few days ago. You know, having been, I didn't start in agriculture. So the way I've been able to understand agriculture over the last decade has really been almost like a special journey, which I wish to always impart to everybody on this planet, because you know, food systems, agriculture, all of that is all part of our lives, whether you're working in it or not. And so in this world, this World Environment Day, I think it's important for each and every person to really take a moment and understand the impact that they have on the environment and how the environment impacts them. That's something we don't get a chance to think about when we're working in tall buildings. We think, you know, you're in your car, you're just literally, you feel like you're just in this different world, but we are interacting with the environment all the time. How do we, you know, as humans, really feel a sense of responsibility around actually making sure that how we actually interact with the environment and how we benefit from it, as well as what do we give back? So that's probably my challenge to everyone. What do we give back to the environment, which gives so much to us?
Wow, that's a big one. We are all taking. What do we give back? Big question. I've not seen any brave contributions from our audience. So I'll move on to invite Philip Elul, who is the United Nations Food Systems Secretariat Research and Innovation Strategy 2030 representative, who is going to share with us the roadmap looking forward to the UNFSS Summit. Over to you, Philip Elul.
Thank you, Lindiwe, and very, very proud and honored to be in this conversation. That's really great, and I will try to bring value to the very interesting discussion with a few concluding remarks. I will share my screen for that because of the level of complexity or what it's going to be cooked there. So I guess you can see my screen.
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah. So, and I guess I am in presentation mode. Is that okay?
You're not in presentation mode, but we can see it's fine. You can go ahead. No, now okay. You're in presentation. You are good now. Great. Please go ahead.
Next time. Thank you. So I have a kind of a double hat, and I was very pleased to see my colleague Victor from CGIAR and probably many others attending from our CGIAR program on climate change. So my background from the last 7-8 years is from the CGIAR organization, indeed putting in place a results and monitoring framework for our 12 CGIAR research program and platforms. And from starting in January, I was asked or proposed to second this UNFSS and working with the Secretariat. And that was a great opportunity and very proud to be working with all these UN colleagues. So I'm trying to show you today what's happening at that level. And the first probably step to understand how to be sure we will have a good interconnection between all the different pieces is to understand the complexity of the big factory, which is really growing and through the pre-summit preparation. So you have many inputs coming from different work streams, and I think that's for the first time a unique opportunity in the history of the food system to have so many people contributing from so many different parts of the world with different backgrounds. So champion network, we have obviously the private sector with the CEOs from different companies, the civil society. We have a diversity of people working in the 5 action tracks and 4 levels of change. We have the dialogues at different level, the national, international level, independent dialogue, UN task force, non-UN task force, for example, the CGIAR is also involved in that. And obviously, and not less important, the scientific group, because all of that is really being prepared in strong connection with the scientists in order to be sure that we are proposing actions fully at the upper level and upper state of the art of what's really now available in terms of science and innovation. And what I'm going to present today is the level we are understanding this follow-up and review mechanism. We want to be at the higher level, at the level of the outcomes and impact of the press summit and mostly summit, because what I was really asked is to prepare what will be really going on after September, and at what point all the key players I am presenting here will be involved in following their commitment at the different level, national, international, or more local level. I will just show you this kind of pyramid. We are now in June, and you can see that we are at the upper part of this pyramid, which is great. We recovered through different wave of proposals, more than 2,200 propositions. That's just amazing. And the action track leaders and level of innovation leaders have made a great job to really articulate and go through these hundreds of propositions, really to end up with less game-changing proposals through a clustering exercise. So now we are dealing with what we called 50, I think it's 53 or 54 solution clusters after the aggregation process of this proposition. And the idea was to have this solution cluster obviously organized through the different 5 action tracks you probably already know, each action track being broken down in action areas. So now we have these 15 action areas with solution clusters very well mapped. And all of that is being reorganized even in a more funnel approach to really propose what is called 6 areas of convergence, because even 50 solution clusters, it's a lot to deal with. So we want to have this organization in areas of convergence. I will go back to that level. And hopefully we will be able to propose a proper review mechanism and at the outcome and impact level in the upper part of this pyramid. A very recent document shared by the Secretariat and the organizing committee last week is really where we are at. We have these action tracks I have already talked about, these 15 action areas in the 5 action tracks. We have been able to identify gaps after the first wave of proposals, for example, regarding the COVID-19 impact on food system or agribusiness or packaging. So, and we are trying now to bring the wave 2 proposal to really fill these different gaps in different kind of topics. We have an amazing work at the national level with the national dialogues, and our colleague David Navarro is really organizing and structuring all these national dialogues. We have also the connection with the independent dialogues on different topics. And finally, I already talked about that, the connection with the scientific group preparing their brief papers. But what is really important is that now, thanks to the different 2,200 proposals organized in the different solution clusters, we have been able to link these solution clusters and the action areas to the Sustainable Development Goals, meaning that for each of these different areas, we have identified different SDG targets and indicators mapped to these different action areas. So that will be presenting in a document jointly with a follow-up and review mechanism document. But unfortunately for us, some of the indicators are not really mapping perfectly the need for the different solution clusters. And that's the reason why we contact the World Benchmarking Alliance to just check with them if we would be able to use part of their work on their own indicators really to complete the list of indicators we have currently put in place from the SDG, from the food system SDG related ones. And that's the reason why we will go through the governance and strategy, environment, nutrition, and social inclusion indicators. There is an amazing work already done by our colleague from WBA, and I have already identified many of key indicators that will be extremely helpful in order to complete this mapping exercise for the follow-up and review mechanism. Another key approach is that we have other initiative in parallel, which is a really reorganization of the CGIAR through the CGIAR 2030 research and innovation strategy. That's something happening now, and this document is available. And in addition, we have in the CGIAR an investment plan related to this strategy. And what I've done in parallel is trying to understand at what point the action tracks from the summit are really aligned with our priorities in the CGIAR. And that's again amazing, because you can see that if you are going through on the column on the left, what we call the CGIAR action areas, we have system transformation, resilient agri-food system, with different priorities. We have a very strong congruence with many of the action tracks. Action track 1 on safe and nutrition food, action track 5 on resilience, vulnerability, shock and stress, but also on boosting a nature positive production, on innovation, obviously. And what we are trying to do now is really to align our investment plan with the UNFSS action areas and priorities. So what are the next steps? The next steps will be this to finalize this mapping exercise between the SDG related indicators and the more than 50 solution clusters that's underway. I am looking for complementary indicators for governance, finance, policy, or legislation aspects, and that's where we are connecting with WBA, and now I guess with the CFS guidelines. I was very pleased to know that you have documents for guidelines and documents for principles that could be very helpful to complete the list of indicators for this summit and the following actions. I am also trying to understand at what point we can learn from the private sector. I am coming from the private sector after 10 years working for seed companies in Spain. So I just want to understand at what point we can take advantage of the work of the private sector, WBA again, and WBCSD to really complete this mapping exercise. And what's really important, we cannot talk about monitoring and following progress if we are not able to measure and to try to understand at what point we are progressing annually towards the different SDG targets. And that's the reason why I wanted to connect with the scientific group for that, and also with the CGIAR investment plan for the coming 3 years, where we have very, very clear measurable targets. And finally, we will try to present all this way of following up and measuring progress after the UNFSS in an integrated dashboard, probably taking advantage of the countdown country profile dashboard or other available around. That's what we are trying to put in place. It's going very well, and we are preparing what's called the press summit for the end of July. In this press summit, what would be the proposal? Would be to allow the member states to explore national food systems transformation pathway and map the proposed actions and solutions to achieve the SDG by 2030 with support from stakeholders, obviously, hopefully at the national level. For that, I really love the response from Victoria about learning from others. Others could be member states, funders, UN agency, uploading on what's going well. That's really the way of working, no reinventing the wheel in terms of indicators and targets, and dialogue again at the national, independent, or regional level. I think that's a fully multi-stakeholder collaboration process, and very proud to be on board for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for sharing with us the hard work that you're doing behind the scenes. It's all complex, but what's comforting is that you're going back to the national level it's not just an event for September, but there'll be a deep dive on implementation. Secondly, you're learning, and you have amplified the major role that WBA is playing, and that you'll be seeking more partnerships for sharing knowledge, experiences, and frameworks that you can incorporate into making sure we achieve sustainable food systems. But most important, what I found exciting was that you have calibrated this whole journey with the broader game of 2030, which is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So definitely, it's not just an event, it's going to leave us a lot better than we've ever been in the food systems journey. Thank you very much for unpacking what you're doing behind the scenes. Please, can I have all the speakers and panelists come up? I see there's a hand from CFS Secretary. Please come on. Please go ahead.
Just waiting for the video to be, the host has to allow video. Let's see. Yeah, still waiting for the host, but in the interim, let me
Please go ahead with the audio. Go ahead on the audio. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Hi, Lindiwe, great to see you. Great job moderating, and thanks for being a longtime friend of the CFS. You'll recall we met back in 2014 negotiating the Global Alliance on Climate Smart Agriculture with Hans and others, and always a pleasure to see you involved. That wasn't so long ago, but let me also just highlight, over this last year, I've been working with Victoria, WBA, and the WBCSD to really broaden our relationships as the CFS. And I'm glad to see them here. I would have liked to have seen more participants, but I think we need to share the recording and really drum up support for this collaboration. And I want to see it continue, because it complements the great work of our private sector mechanism in the CFS. I see Robin and Rosemary are here. And we need to really bring the private sector together using the documents that we have developed over the past 11 years since CFS's reform. So we look forward to that relationship developing and strengthening. And as Philippe described with the Food Systems Summit, there are some key opportunities for us not only to embed the work of the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition that Hans spoke about, but our other flagship products, the CFS VGGT, the CFS RIE principles, and start using the summit. I mean, Philippe, you listed a long list of products, projects, in all the component pieces of this summit, and I didn't hear CFS, and it's a shame because we are not building on the 11 years of work in this summit the way we ought to. And I hope you, as CGIAR and an advisory group member, bring that point into the conversations and strengthen through the summit our activities to promote responsible investment, land tenure, and the food system nutrition guidelines that we spent hundreds of hours working to develop. This is the UN's CFS. This is the unique platform for multi-stakeholder negotiation. It is something that the summit will definitely benefit from, but the summit is a one-day event. We need to utilize the tools at hand after September 25th or whenever it's over. And so we look to strengthen those partnerships with everyone that is coming into the picture through this summit. But please remember, we have a very active set of goals and work streams that are starting. We have a data collection and analysis tools workshop to develop policy recommendations, an open house meeting on the 1st of July. Please join us 3 p.m. to save the date. We are also producing voluntary guidelines on women's empowerment that we're already starting. We'd love to have you all involved in the production and the consultation process The youth report from the high-level panel of experts of CFS will be released on July 5th. And we will continue to produce documents negotiated by member states. That's where the summit is really in need of tying this ambition, tying all this work of the action tracks to what governments are doing. And that's where CFS is really that pivotal gear in the midst of this important process. So Lindiwe, you did a great job. Loved hearing the Victorias, Nono and Tiffany. Keep it up. You're welcome at CFS anytime.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. You've just summed it all by cementing that the partnership with CFS has to be strengthened. And it leaves me to thank my panelists, to thank my keynote speaker, to thank Ambassador Hans Hoogeveen for the opening remarks and our organizers for an excellent session. Not to forget you, the participants, for your active participation, the questions. The journey is on. We don't want to leave anyone behind. Keep marching on. And beyond September, we are going to have sustainable food systems, and we will make sure these frameworks are operationalized. Thank you, and goodbye.